Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. My name is Anna, and about a year ago I went to a bread baking class. And since then I've made bread at least once a week, usually twice or three times. So at this point, if my math is correct, I should be over 100 breads made. And there are definitely some takeaways and lessons learned from that process, and this video is going to be all about those. My first takeaway, lesson learned, is that homemade bread is delicious. And this may not be very surprising to you. Maybe you've tasted homemade bread, or at least a really good bread from a bakery, just fresh out of the oven, and then I cut it into a few slices, put some butter on it, and put some jam, cherry jam. My mom made this awesome peach jam last year, and I'm in heaven. Like, that is the highlight of my day, when I can have that kind of a snack with the fresh bread. So I don't think I need to talk more about this. Number one, I hope we can all agree, or at least those of you that like bread, that the homemade kind or the fresh one from the bakery is the best. Lesson number two, making your own bread is both complicated and very easy. And just to be clear, I'm talking about sourdough bread here. That's what I'm making. And to explain this a little bit more, I feel like, just like with so many other things, you can apply the 80-20 principle to baking bread as well. The 80-20 being for getting an 80% of the result, where 100% is like the most perfect bread you've ever seen. When you want 80% of that, you only need 20% of the effort. Whereas for the remaining 20%, to get it to perfection from the 80%, which is like a really good bread, you need the remaining 80% of the effort. So I feel like, because there are so many variables in it, like the type of flour you use, and the temperature in your house, and the timing, and your sourdough starter, and like all these factors, I don't know, your mood that day, whatever, there can be varying results. But in my experience, at least, I can really do things very simply to get that very good result. And yes, I could worry about, oh, what is the flour that I'm using? Oh, I need to, time this to the minute, and then my bread is going to turn out absolutely perfect, flawless, perfectly symmetrical holes in it and whatever. But I don't need that. I don't need 100% perfect bread. I'm good with 80%. Even 60% is still really nice bread, in my opinion. And so the way I do it is I just don't worry about it too much. So that's kind of, my explanation for this. It's complicated, but also it doesn't have to be all that complicated. And by the way, next week I will be sharing the exact recipe, how I make my sourdough bread. So if you want to see that and see how I make it less than how complicated it needs to be, then that's a video coming up next week. What is tied to this, it's not as complicated, is lesson number 3, and that is that the sourdough starter is not a child, and you do not have to treat it like one. And I know that this is a joke, and if you haven't seen any other sourdough bread related videos, you may not know, but a lot of people make this, what's it called? Not assumption, but this relation between your sourdough starter is this like precious thing, and you have to keep such a close check on it, and you have to, this other day I was at a different cooking class and we were talking about baking sourdough bread, and this other girl was telling me, oh, and the starter, like you have to really take care of it, right? That's what it is. And I'm like, no, you don't. You don't have to. The way I treat my sourdough starter, it just lives in the fridge. It's in the fridge all the time. And when I need it, I take it out, I feed it, which means I give it flour and water, let it do its thing. A couple hours later, it's ready. I can make bread. When I'm done using it, put it in the fridge and forget about it. That's it. There is no schedule, no like, oh my God, I haven't fed my starter in 3 days. The world is ending. That's not how it is, at least not for me. So, but the important point is that it does have to be in the fridge. If you were to keep it at room temperature and not do anything with it for 2 weeks, I'm pretty sure that your sourdough starter is gone. Like, it's just not as in it disappears, it just spoils. The bacteria won't survive without the water and flour. But you can think of it with the fridge, you're putting them to sleep, essentially. So you're putting all this good bacteria that makes the starter, you're putting them to sleep by placing them in the fridge with the cold temperature. So I'm putting them to sleep, and whenever I need them to wake up and do their job, take them out of the fridge, feed them, they work, eat up all that flour and water, make more of the starter, which I can then use, and then again, just keep the very little amount. In fact, let me show you. This is the jar where I keep it, and this is how much of it I have in there. So very, very little, which also means I'm always only using and feeding it as much as I need for that one bread or that one thing that I'm using it for, which also means I have no discard that I would somehow have to work with, which is what you see in a lot of these videos and recipes as well, like what to do with sourdough discard. And I'm like, what do you mean? I don't have any. So anyways, this, not a child, just goes into the fridge, that's it. And then my 2 last points, first one being, you do not need any equipment. Maybe with the exception of like a bread basket. That's the only one where I'm not sure. Like when I was at the class, they were showing us like how can you make one from just using like a tea towel and just a couple clothing pins, and you can kind of shape it into the shape of a bread basket. But I don't know, like I thought that looked like a little bit too much work. So investing, the bread baskets are super, super cheap. So that's, in my opinion, the only thing you need. You do not need a Dutch oven. You do not need, I don't know, any kind of like special tools or special spatulas, and the lame or lame or however you pronounce it for cutting it. Like, for me, yes, I have those things. I have both a Dutch oven and the lame, but I bought those after a couple months of making the bread. After I was sure that this is something I enjoy and I'm not going to stop anytime soon. Before that point, I felt like there's no reason for me to put any investment into it, because who knows, maybe I will get tired of this after 2 months. And if I didn't want to invest that money, I wouldn't have to. Like, it's just those things, they don't make the bread any better tasting. They make it better looking. So if you don't care about how the bread looks and you just want delicious bread, again, just no supplies needed. And I'll talk about this more when I'm doing the recipe video where I talk about how I did it before I had those things. And lesson number 5 is that your oven will be put to the test. Let me explain. When you're baking bread, your oven needs to be extremely, extremely, extremely hot. In my case, I'm doing like the first 20 minutes of the baking is at 250 degrees. That's almost as high as my oven goes. And I never ever use that kind of a temperature for anything else. And it's not just those 20 minutes, you have to preheat it to that temperature. And then you want to essentially heat up the Dutch oven that I'm using for baking the bread. You want to make sure that it's really, really hot, because it then helps the bread to pop up by all of a sudden being enclosed in this super hot container. And so I have it running at that 250 for like 30-ish minutes beforehand. When I was at the course, they actually told us to do it for an hour before we put the bread in, but I'm like, oh, I don't want my oven just running with nothing in it for a whole hour. So I've cut that in half. I find that works just as well too. So 30 minutes, then 20 minutes with the bread in, and then like 10 to 15 more minutes on a slightly lower temperature without the lid off, and to make the crust and whatever. I don't want to get into the details, but the overall lesson being, like, you're using the oven to its maximum, right? And depending on how often you're making the bread, again, in my case, once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week. Plus, I have started using the oven much, much more for loads of other things as well, since I'm staying at home and cooking a lot more now that we have our child. The oven is just really, really going, which is why I don't want to say it broke, but I did have to have a part of it replaced, because it was essentially like worn out, right? It was because I'm using the oven so much, a part of it had to be replaced. Which, if you've seen my fails in the kitchen video, 2 of those were baking projects, and they didn't turn out so well. And then one of you commented, again, thank you so much for pointing that out, that it looks like it's because of the oven, that the oven is just not baking it properly. And sure enough, I called a repairman, and that's what he discovered. So, and that's this oven that I have here, but also an oven that we have at our country house where I also bake the bread. That was like a 40-year-old oven, so it was gonna go eventually, but my bread baking definitely pushed it beyond that border of functionality a lot sooner than it had to go. So that's one thing to be prepared for if you are going to make bread really, really often. Or at least, let me correct it, at least that has been my experience. Maybe your oven is, I don't know, much more used to this, or it's of a different kind, different brand, different make, and it's going to last those temperatures really well, no issues whatsoever. That could be the case. I only have experience with these 2, but that's what my experience has been. So to summarize all of these lessons I've learned, there are some things that are maybe difficult, or let me say it like this. Baking bread is a skill. And just like any skill, you have to learn it. Like, you have to learn the process. And once you learn, it becomes very, very easy. And there's also ways how you can make it easier than I feel like other people make it sound or make it out to be. I feel like those people, either they haven't tried skipping certain steps or just doing them in an easier way, or they really are going for that perfection or close to perfection. And I'm not going for perfection, and I'm definitely somebody who wants to skip steps if they are not completely necessary. So I have tried kind of skipping things here and there to make that whole process easier for me. And even though it is still, I would say, quite a bit of work or quite a bit of a process, which you will see in the recipe video, for me, it's 100% worth it, because that bread, yeah, I'm sorry I can't like pass the taste and the smell through the camera to you, but that fresh bread, it's one of the things I enjoy the most in my kitchen, if not really the one thing I enjoy the most to make and to eat as well. And so if you're wondering whether you should maybe give it a try, I'm somebody who's going to say absolutely, you should. If you know that you like bread or this type of food, then a homemade sourdough bread is something you should try to do. And with that encouragement, that is the end of the video. Of course, if you have any questions, just put them down below. And next week, we are going to take a look at my sourdough bread recipe. Until then, see ya.